Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our conference Medievalisms on the Screen. And today I'm going to share this session, Divulgating the Middle Ages through Social Media. My name is Olga Kalashnikova. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Medieval Studies Department at Central European University. And before we proceed to our presentations, let me kindly remind you about our housekeeping rules. So each presenter will have 20 minutes for the presentation, and we will keep the Q&A session till the very end. So we will have approximately half an hour for the further discussion. So having said this, let me introduce our first speaker, Igor Stamenovic, who is a junior researcher at the Department of History at the University of Niš in Serbia. He earned a BA and MA degrees in history from the University of Niš and another MA degree in theology from the University of Belgrade. His current doctoral research at the University of Niš examines the role of Eastern Christians in the crusading plans and propaganda after the Ottoman conquest of Constantinople. And Igor's other research interests include the political, cultural, and religious history of the Balkans in the late Middle Ages, as well as Eastern and Western critical political theology and medieval frontiers and frontier societies. So today he is going to present on information and disinformation about the Middle Ages on popular Serbian history social media pages. So Igor, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Just to start the screen sharing. Yeah. So the subject of this research is information and disinformation about the Middle Ages on popular Serbian history social media pages. The goal of the research was to determine how the knowledge about the Middle Ages is presented on the most popular Serbian Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages and YouTube channels about Serbian history. Moreover, the research estimates the influence of this kind of informal history learning on the public opinion in Serbia and its political potential and vice versa. Three most followed pages on the aforementioned platforms were analyzed. Given the fact that since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, the number of social network users has increased drastically, analyzed data covers the period from March the 1st, 2019 to March the 1st, 2023. In that period, Serbia's internet penetration rate increased for almost 10% and percent of active social media users for more than 25%. According to the statistics, the most influential social media networks for transmission of historical or any other content in Serbia are YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Three most followed YouTube pages or YouTube channels about Serbian history are Serbia Global, Srpske bitke or Serbian battles, and the page called Drevna Istorija Srba or Ancient History of the Serbs. Serbia Global is the most popular YouTube channel focused on Serbian history. Total number of videos about the Middle Ages is 35, and the number of videos containing disinformation is 32. Most of the historical information about the Middle Ages on this channel, be it true or false, is presented within right-wing or conspiracy theory framework. The general thesis in the videos is that there is a kind of politicized pro-Western official historiography in Serbia that tries to downgrade the role of the Serbs in the Middle Ages. Serbia Global's videos often present legitimate historical sources, but they do it very selectively and completely outside the historical context. In that way, the viewer gets an illusion that this information is supported by the actual source. Srpske bitke, total number of videos about the Middle Ages is 35. There is only one misinformative video. In general, this channel bases its videos on historical research and latest results of modern historiography without imposing any political ideas. And the Drevna Istorija Srba, total number of videos about the Middle Ages on this channel is 18. And there are 16 videos containing disinformation. The channel is dominated by pseudo-historical narrative, many videos about early medieval Serbian history, are based on uncritical and at the same time very selective acceptance of Gesta Regum Sclavorum, that is a source from the late 13th century that contains many legendary rulers and dynasties of the Slavs in the medieval Dioclea. Three most followed Facebook pages with historical content in Serbia are Historia Srba, or History of the Serbs, Srpska Historia, or Serbian History, and Srpska Srednjovekovna Historia, or Serbian Medieval History. Historia Srba has 289 posts about medieval history. Number of posts containing disinformation is 54. And there is a strong connection between the nationalistic narrative, current political events, and disinformation on this page. Interaction between the political ideas and distribution of historical information is generally more visible on platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, since there is a higher possibility for instant reaction to the actual political events. Srpska Historia has 260 posts about medieval Serbia. Number of posts containing disinformation is 42, and there is a strong connection between nationalistic narrative and disinformation posts on this page as well. Srpska Srednjovekovna Historia is a page dedicated exclusively to Serbian medieval history. Total number of posts about medieval history is 766, and number of posts containing disinformation is 0. This page represents a good example of how the information about the Middle Ages should be presented on the social media. All posts are based on the historical sources and conclusions of modern historiography. All posts have Serbian and English versions of the main text, which is short but informative, and posts containing the information which is not well confirmed in the sources clearly underline that. The posts on this page are not connected to any political ideology, not even posts dealing with medieval themes that are popular among nationalists in Serbia, such as the question of the Serbian Empire in the 14th century or Kosovo battle, etc. Three most followed Instagram pages with historical content in Serbia are Srpska Historia, Serbia Medieval History, and Historia Srba. Srpska Historia has 287 posts about medieval history. Number of posts containing disinformation is 43. The connection between the nationalist narrative and disinformation posts is very obvious. For example, 39 out of 43 disinformation posts have a right-wing attitude. The posts are mostly focused on proving the superiority of the Serbian medieval state, on downplaying the medieval past of the surrounding nations, as well as on emphasizing the gap between the Roman Catholic West and the Orthodox East. Sources are accessed very selectively. Serbian Medieval History is the Instagram page of the before-mentioned Srpska Srednjovekovna Historia Facebook page. So total number of posts about medieval history on this page is 378, and number of posts containing disinformation is also 0. Everything that was said about the Facebook page also applies to the Instagram page. Historia Srba, total number of posts about medieval history is 63, and number of posts containing disinformation is 50. The connection between the right-wing narrative and disinformation posts of this page is also very, very strong. 14 out of 15 disinformation posts could be placed in the nationalistic context. The influence of Twitter on the public opinion in Serbia is generally low, and it is even lower considering the distribution of historical information. Analyzed pages have a very small number of followers. Three most followed pages are Srpska Historia, the page with the same name, Srpska Historia, and Chronograph. There is only one post about medieval page on Srpska Historia, on the first mentioned Srpska Historia page, and the second Srpska Historia page has 21 posts about medieval Serbia, 3 of which contain disinformation in the nationalistic context. Chronograph has 27 posts about Middle Ages and only 1 disinformation. This page operates with generally credible information, but more in a clickbait form, and has a very small number of followers, as you can see on the screen. The analysis has shown that the current political events influence the social media content about the Middle Ages in Serbia. Romanticized vision of medieval Serbia is in the center of nationalist ideology and right-wing narrative in the country. Therefore, medievalism is being used on social media as a tool to generate the nationalist propaganda in the current political crisis. For example, there was an increase of nationalistic disinformation posts about medieval Serbia on the most popular pages that were mentioned. After the announcement of President of Serbia's consideration of so-called French-German proposal for the solution of the Kosovo problem, there was also an increase of nationalistic posts about medieval Serbia after Serbian Orthodox Church announced granting the autocephaly to the Macedonian Orthodox Church. Both events are considered by many Serbian nationalists and conservative thinkers to be treason. The most common topics when it comes to misuse of Serbian medievalism are, on the first place, Croatian medieval history, especially thesis that Croatian kings are historical fiction. This thesis relies on a general lack of sources for the early medieval history of the Balkans in general. There is an ongoing discussion in historiography about the chronology, the role, the persons, and the politics of Croatian kings in that period, things that, of course, should be discussed, but none of the researchers ever tried to completely deny their existence. The topic's popularity could be viewed as a consequence of still living traumas from the period of a civil war in ex-Yugoslavia and World War II as well. Here we can see the video from the mentioned Serbia Global channel in which the authors present the history of the Croats as a forgery. On the right, you can see a meme that was widely shared on Facebook and Instagram pages that were analyzed. The second popular topic is the person of George Kastriota Skanderbeg, and this is that he was actually an Orthodox Serbian who fought against the Ottomans to reclaim his Orthodox Serbian homeland. This thesis relies on the fact that part of the Skanderbeg's ancestry was probably Slavic or Serbian, but it implies terms of nation in a completely modern sense. Some of the analyzed posts even misquote known researchers of Skanderbeg, such as O.J. Schmidt, to prove the claims and give an illusion of historicity of their claims. This topic corresponds to current political tensions between the Serbs and the Albanians in the south. And here we can see the post from Srpska Istorija Instagram page and Facebook page with the same name, both claiming Skanderbeg to be a Serbian national hero. Third popular topic are Serbian or Orthodox Roman Catholic antagonisms. Serbs are being often shown as the traditional enemies of the Latins. To support the claims, authors of these posts selectively give examples of historical antagonisms out of any historical context. This thesis is in correlation with the first topic and generally negative attitude toward Roman Catholicism that exists in part of the Orthodox public. We can see a few videos from Serbia Global's channel about the alleged role of the Roman Catholic Church in forging the Serbian medieval history in order to downgrade it. And Srpska Istorija's post about the alleged rejection of Serbian despot George to participate in the Council of Florence in 1439. Most of the pages containing historical disinformation use pseudo-historical narrative, even if some historians, for example, openly criticize what is commonly known in Serbia as pseudo-history. Thesis that Slavs are, for example, thesis that Slavs are autochthon people in the Balkans. They fit the most criteria of pseudo-historicity, such are lack of critical approach to historical text and their authors, sense of a mission or a quest to support some political idea, considering possibility of something being true as a sufficient to believe it is true, if it fits the agenda, of course, or the conspiracy framework. What is alarming considering the pseudo-historicity is the fact that pages with the biggest number of followers on each of the analyzed platforms, except Instagram, are at the same time the biggest distributors of disinformation. It seems that the placement of disinformation in a right-wing political context results in a greater number of followers and gains a greater reach, which generates the increase of these kinds of posts. The fact that even when the regular information is published, the context within which it is published is often nationalistic, proves the influence of that framework in shaping the popular historical posts on social media in Serbia. The question is, how can Serbian academic community possibly contribute to reducing the impact of pseudo-historical and manipulative content about the Serbian medieval ages? First, it needs to work on the visibility on the social media platforms and to offering a short, effective, and interesting content that strictly relies on the critical analysis of the sources and latest researchers. Second, the academic institutions should work more on the open access policy and the visibility of the research results. And third, since the YouTube is the most used social media platform in Serbia, medieval historical institutes and historians themselves could consider offering short lectures or podcasts on some of the intriguing topics, presenting the critical historiography's point of view. In that way, historians in Serbia could become a relevant factor in creating and distributing historical content on the social network and give the contribution to informal ways of learning about the medieval history. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor, for your wonderful presentation. I'm sure that it will sparkle some debates at our Q&A session. And let us now proceed to the presentation followed by our second presenter, Jaime Tortosa Quirós, who graduated with a degree in history from the University of Valencia in Spain, and also completed his master's degree in history of the formation of the accidental world at the same faculty. Currently, he's doing a doctoral thesis about the family in the late Middle Ages, and he is also a pre-doctoral contracted researcher and teacher of the medieval history at the Medieval History Department at the University of Valencia. He is also the co-founder of the social media account called Res Historica, and he will actually present on this particular social account. So Jaime, the floor is yours. You will have 20 minutes for your presentation.
Okay, thanks for the introduction and thanks for taking me into account for this Congress, which I find very interesting. I am going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages that the social media offer us as content creators for divulgating information about history and about Middle Ages specifically. And I will focus a bit more on the possibilities that they offer as I said, as content creators. I will speak about my own case, my own situation as a co-founder and co-content creator in the account Res Historica. I'm in charge of the medieval ages part and medieval ages content, but my other colleague, Sandra Boluda, is in charge of the modern age history in general. So that are the periods that we speak about in our social media. We are present in a lot of web pages, but I'm going to focus on the ones that we use most. And yes, as I said, I'm going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages that in general this social media, this social network entail, so that we can have a better context of understanding of the possibilities that they offer us. Firstly, this social media offer us a great potential audience because we can reach a lot of people. Really, almost anybody that has an access to the internet can access the web pages, the social media. So the potential public is huge. Obviously, we're not going to reach everybody, but the potential is really, really big. And that is a consequence of internet and democratization to the access of these sources. Also, the social media offer us the possibility to put to link the academic world and the general public, understanding the general public as anybody who can access to the internet and not necessarily and it is not necessarily interested in history, but we can like connect them with the historians and the new historiographical visions through this social media. I think, at least here in Spain, the links between the university, the academic world, and the general public is really low. The general public is not aware of the latest research and historical finds. They are aware of the ones that were made 50, 40, 30 years ago, but not the most recent ones. So I think it is really important to bring them these new researches and finds through this social media, partly because of we don't want them or we want to give them tools to be critics with the political discourses that were mentioned in the latest communication, for example. And we want them to actually understand better their past. And yeah, I think this is very important to communicate between this academic world and this general public. Also, social media are really powerful tool to show and share our own research topics, not only in web pages like ResearchGate or Academia, but also in Twitter, Instagram. It is very, very useful to search these researches. In my case, I often summarize some of its content to make it easier for the general public. And I think this is also really useful to put yourself into contact with the public and make people aware of your own work. Also, the social media offer a lot of interaction, a lot of communication. This is a big difference with other previous media like television, newspapers, or radio. They didn't offer that communication between the content creators and the public. But on the social media, you can message, you can communicate, you can put comments, you can find people of your same research interest, message them. You can create a community between you and your followers, or between you and other accounts. You can make collaborations. So the possibilities are really, really big. Also, these social media are really useful for learning because you learn while creating content. Your followers can learn of your content, and you can also learn from other accounts, and you can also, the content that is uploaded can be seen and can be checked in the future, and will stay there forever. So it is very useful as a tool for learning. But these social media also have some disadvantages, like the lack of scientific filters or committees, because unlike on these congresses, unlike on the university world, we are used to have that scientific filters or committees that measure that the content, that these congresses, that everything is of good quality content. But on the internet, anybody can publish, can post whatever they want, including wrong information, outdated information, biased information, and that is a problem because the internet has made possible for everyone to access to this social media, but also has started the era of fake news and fake information that we need to take into account because it's really a problem. Also, we need to talk about the arguments, disputes, and toxicity that often we can see on this social media. These arguments between accounts, between people, partly because of that, because as anybody can access this social media, not everybody will have the same way of behaving like in the university. You can see a lot of insults, arguments, and disputes, and I think that is bad for the divulgation on the social media, and we need to take that also into account. Also, you can find on the social media certain episodes of plagiarism, which isn't good neither. And I think it is very important to mention your sources, but obviously not everybody does that. And also, as other disadvantages, we can talk about the fact that sometimes the visual appearance is more important than the quality of the content here in the social media. And also the fact that the algorithms tend to favor the people or the content that is not that complex. So in that regard, the divulgation is sometimes difficult because you don't usually reach that many people because of that. But anyways, as an advantage and a disadvantage, the social media the social media creators need to be in constant innovation. And now I'm going to talk about the possibilities that they offer from my own point of view. In my case, most of my content is uploaded to YouTube or to Instagram. In YouTube, I upload news about history in general, about archaeology. We make interviews with people that has made certain research. I want to share it with everybody. We also speak about certain TV series or video games from a historical point of view. We also talk about myths that are not how the general public believe that they are. So we try to bring interesting content to the people, following that idea of connecting the university and the world of the research and the general public. But the place where we upload the most quantity of content is Instagram, where we try to offer written content with obviously limited characters and limited space, but we try to offer interesting content for the general public. For example, we talk about certain concepts that are often misunderstood here in Spain. For example, the difference between Muslim, Moor, or Arab, that is often considered in a wrong way. We also answer certain questions that can be considered as curious, like, for example, why here in Spain and also in other Latin countries have two last names, while in most of Europe, the people have one name and then one last name. Why do here have two last names? We try to find the answer from while reading, obviously, papers and books, and we try to offer that answer to the people in a rigorous way. We link those questions, for example, this one with the family, the kin, the lineage, etc. Questions that are important with history, and we try to see the evolution of that question through the centuries. For example, we also summarize certain periods. For example, we made a post of the 11th century here in the Iberian Peninsula with limited characters, then another one of the 12th, another one of the 13th, etc. We also make book reviews, and we don't only talk about political history, like here in Spain most of the people are used to when they think about history, but we also talk about economic history, social history, and we also talk about our main research. But I'm going to develop a bit more an example of how we can use the strengths of this social media in order to divulgate information about the Middle Ages and attract a lot of people to the study or the knowledge about the Middle Ages. This example is about one kind of contest that we made that we call games. This contest was about some games that we published in seasonal events that our followers needed to guess or to solve. These games contain questions that refer to primary sources that our followers need to try to read, or images related with the Middle Ages, and a question about these images that our followers need to solve. In that sense, we even made rankings of the people that were guessing most of the games. We were answering. Well, these games were published on stories. I don't know if you know the stories, but the stories disappear after 24 hours. So the followers needed to solve the games in that time, within these 24 hours. They answered, and we gave them hints. We told them, you are not doing this right. You try to focus on this, try to focus on that. We kind of helped them to make them be interested on that sources. The success of these games, of this system, was huge. I think mainly because of the interaction that this social media offer us. All the people, or a lot of people wanted to solve those games, got really interested, even if they didn't know how to read those texts. They tried, and they approached these games with a lot of interest. And I think partly because it's a bit of an innovative method that we put into practice. To give you an example, because the photos are in Spanish, the first game, for example, what we see in the left, asks what event does this document describe? And it was the proclamation of the Pope Callistus III, the first Borgia Pope. And it appeared in a notarial protocol that I was reading at that moment. So I use it as a way of as a game. I took it and I put it for the followers to guess it. This one is about is an image that represents the entrance of the King Alfonso V of the Crown of Aragon after the conquest of Naples in the middle of the 15th century. This one was about a castle that the followers need to guess. Here in Spain, it's a really unknown castle because it is abandoned. On this one, they needed to guess what kind of source was shown in the image and the date that it showed. And on the right, we can see we asked why on the coat of arms of the King of the Crown of Aragon after the middle of the 14th century, there was a dragon on top of the helmet. So I think that the concept was really liked by the people because they got really interested on these games, on these images, on this text, and we I think that we got a lot of people hooked and interested on the period. And I think that was part of that was because we were using one of the strengths of this social media, the facility, the possibilities for the interaction, as a way to get a lot of people interested in these games. After the games, we posted the solution with if text were involved, we also wrote the transcription and translations, so they could actually learn from the text, not only say, yeah, I guess it right. No, they could also learn from them. And I think this serves as an example of that, of how this social media can also be used in a way that we can make people interested and make people aware of history, of new finds, of new researches, and also get them interested in the view or the interpretation of primary sources. Obviously, in a level, in a basic level, but at least we got them interested in that sense. As a conclusion, I think that the social media are really a powerful tool to divulgate information about the Middle Ages. We have to take into account the advantages and disadvantages that they have. But I think that it is really important to make people aware of the new researches, new historical visions, new finds, to let them know their own past, to make understand their past in a way that the university is showing with the biggest detail. Obviously, in the social media, you got the challenge of needing to summarize and often simplify some of the content, but you can do it in some ways without losing rigor. Not everybody could do it, but it is sometimes difficult, but I think that is possible with work and trying to do it trying to upload really content that has a lot of quality. I think that on the social network, the content creators shouldn't focus on the number of followers that they have, but rather on the quality of their content, and they need to be responsible. That's difficult because, as I said, everybody can upload content, but at least the people who are from the university and want to divulgate, I think that we can do it in a proper way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime, for your wonderful presentation. It was very interesting, and I think we can all discuss it later. And let us now move to the last but not least presenter we have at our panel. So our last presenter is Paula Stiles, who wrote her master's thesis on medieval and modern myth about the Knights Templar for the University of Rhode Island. Her PhD on Templar Associates, including women and non-Christians in northeastern medieval Spain, was written for the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. She also collects local folklore, especially ghost lore, which is interesting, urban legends and conspiracy theories. She currently teaches history at Edgecombe Community College in North Carolina. So Paula, please, we are looking forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Just to follow up, let me share my screen real quickly and go from there. Let's see. Okay, all right. Yep, there we go. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Okay. So, okay, I'm going to go to slideshow. Let's look at that. All right. So, to follow up on our previous two presenters, I wanted to talk a little bit about early social media before I get into the deep nitty gritty, which is that, sorry, take these out. They're bothering me. Back in 2001, shortly after 9/11, maybe a day or two afterwards, could have been hours, I was on a Yahoo group early social media called Templars, templars@yahoogroups.com. And it had people, some pretty heavy hitters in the popular history field of that. Graham Hancock was on there, for example. And somebody came on and said that we should have a crusade. We should revive the Templar order and have a crusade and go out and kill all the Muslims because, quote, 1 billion Muslims is 999 million too many, unquote. So that gives you an idea of how pervasive and powerful some of these ideas are on social media and how dangerous they can be. In terms of video games, Templars, of course, appear in games like Assassin's Creed and Warcraft, and they're usually in the Dungeons and Dragons grid. They're lawful good or lawful evil. But I'm going to talk about some older media because the conflict here that I'm talking about goes back all the way back to the beginning of the Templars. And they're not always lawful when they're cast in these fantasies. So, okay, so let's go here to a 19th century image of Templars, which is very clean and neat. They probably weren't that clean and neat in real life. Since their founding around 1119 in Jerusalem, the Knights Templar have been the subject of a great deal of mythologizing, some of it positive, some of it negative, most of it wildly wrong. While some aspects of the Templar legend are harmless, for example, that they are GLBTQ martyrs, others are quite dangerous and contribute to the deadly stew of today's conspiracy theories. Founded originally as an Augustinian tertiary order, basically lay people who lived and worked in the local community, the Milites Templi, aka the Poor Knights of the Temple of Solomon, aka the Knights Templar, started and ended their existence with one primary mission. That was not to fight Muslims per se, it was to patrol the pilgrim routes of Palestine. The Hospitallers, who had been founded in 1040, housed and gave medical attention to the pilgrims. The Templars protected them from bandits who infested every rural roadway in the region. So basically, they were a sort of police force like UN forces today. Seeing the donations possibilities involved, the Hospitallers quickly added their own military function. The order staffed by knights suffering from leprosy, the Knights of St. Lazarus, who probably were originally a Hospitaller order, soon followed and won during the Third Crusade, the Teutonic Knights, that was more nationalistic than the others and beholden to its creator, the Holy Roman Emperor. Other local military religious orders also arose, but these were the four main international orders. The idea of using military force to protect Christians as a permanent religious group was brand new in 1119, and it was extremely controversial. There had previously been temporary alliances of the Seven Samurai or Magnificent Seven variety. There had certainly been secular priests and even monks who had gone to war. Peter the Hermit from the First Crusade fairly leaps to mind. But there had never been an actual order of people who took permanent oaths to the church to engage in a military function. Military matters were left to secular rulers. The idea of a religious order that appeared to embody an ideal of perpetual crusade was highly controversial and immediately popular. Today, we would call this kind of concept a killer app, which is usually considered a computer program that kind of changes the game in the situation and becomes an essential program that never appeared before. In Europe, enthusiastic supporters like Alfonso I of Aragon founded their own short-lived imitations, such as the Order of Belchite, but the original order proved too compelling to ignore. So the first Templar houses appeared in Duzin and Nobius around 1130 in what later became the Templar province of Hispania. Only a few years after the traditional number of 9 veterans of the First Crusade had taken their oaths within the hands of the Patriarch of Jerusalem, the church moved in to incorporate this new and potentially troublesome group into the fold. By 1129, they had acquired a powerful patron, St. Bernard of Clairvaux, who officially refounded the Templars with a new Latin Benedictine rule, overseen and partially written by himself, based on his own Cistercian order. He also wrote a propaganda treatise entitled In Praise of the New Knighthood, in which he compared the killing of Muslims on crusade to, quote, malicide, unquote, killing evil. This is a really important point because it will become a big part of their modern myth. Though their early military record was undistinguished, the Templars became famous for essentially holding the Second Crusade together on its way to the Holy Land through their own internal military discipline. They enjoyed a heyday for the rest of the 12th century as pious Christians practically threw donations at them, and writers like Wolfram von Aschenbach in his Arthurian epic Parzival created fictional chivalric versions of them like Aschenbach's Tom Blazon. We'll hear about them later. And then the donations began to fade in the early 13th century as new orders, notably the Dominican and Franciscan mendicant friars, arose and captured popular imagination. It may not be a coincidence that the latter two orders were heavily involved in prosecuting heresy and persecuting Jews, neither role the Templars were interested in joining, despite Bernard's concept of malicide, and represented a rise in religious intolerance that also did not interest the Templars, though both the Hospitallers and eventually the Teutonic Knights eventually became involved in such movements. The fall of Acre in 1291 was an existential crisis, but the Templars likely would have recovered and continued, as the Hospitallers and Teutonic Knights did, had the order's last Grand Master Jacques de Molay not foolishly trusted King Philip IV of France. Philip ordered every Templar in France arrested in pre-dawn raids on October 13th, 1307. Kings in other realms were persuaded to go along, though with much less enthusiasm and success and more obvious cupidity, by the involvement of the Pope. This was Pope Clement V, who was Philip's pet pope, basically, he was a Frenchman. In 1312, however, even Clement defied his master's orders by merely suppressing the temple, which allowed for its revival in the future. However, these guys are not that revival, and this picture is really ironic. In 1314, de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny, preceptor of Normandy, were burned at the stake for publicly recanting confessions made under torture. Before the year was out, both the king and the pope were dead. The king, in the prime of his life, struck down suddenly by a fit while out hunting. By 1328, all three of Philip's sons and their male heirs had died, and the French nobility crowned one of Philip's nephews rather than Philip's grandson, who was the King of England by his daughter Isabella. This sparked the disastrous, for the French, 100 Years' War, and the Capetian dynasty ended after 4 centuries of unbroken descent from father to son in complete dynastic chaos. On the religious side, Clement had moved the papal capital to Avignon in France in what became known as the Babylonian captivity. This turned into a full schism by the middle of the 14th century and left the Latin Church considerably weakened. Though anti-French Italian writers like Dante gleefully attributed all this to divine judgment, it would be pretty hard not to. It's quite the coincidence. The surviving Templars and order properties were quietly retired to other orders, most notably the Hospitallers, and forgotten for 3 centuries. So while Italian writers are talking about a curse, basically, they're not talking about a curse, they're talking about divine judgment. Later generations, much later, are going to call this a curse, that the Templars actually cursed the king and the Pope. In the 17th century, Thomas Fuller revived the Templars as fanatical Catholic monks. Edward Gibbon took up this line of thought a century later in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, even hinting that the Templars were suppressed for being too fanatical, which is the opposite of what actually happened. So now they're Catholic fanatics. What really brought up the Templars back into popular consciousness and sparked the hostility of writers like Gibbon and Sir Walter Scott, however, was the incorporation of them into the origin legends formulated by the newly formed, or perhaps newly revealed as of 1717, Freemason Society. Not long after, an African-American branch, Prince Hall Freemasonry, was formed in 1775. Prince Hall couldn't get any formal recognition from Freemasons in the new United States of America, but he was able to get it from Great Britain. In their origin myth, the Freemasons claimed descent from medieval Masons and renegade post-trial Templars via the flight of the Templars to Scotland, where they participated in the Battle of Bannockburn on the side of the Scottish King Robert the Bruce. This particular legend does not appear to predate the early 19th century, and the Templars were not well established in Scotland prior to the trial, so they had no reason to flee there. In what were probably anti-Masonic digs, Sir Walter Scott portrayed the Templars in his novels Ivanhoe from 1819 and The Titleist Man, 1825, as treacherous, dark-skinned Islamophobic fanatics like these guys, who alternately violated their vows on a whim and adhered to them even to the point of harming innocents. Scott also portrays Kurdish Sultan Saladin as a genteel, tolerant Arab ruler when he was pretty much none of these things. Sometimes these conflicting behaviors occurred within the same character in the story. In doing so, Scott conflated negative behaviors attributed to other military, religious, and mendicant orders in his image of the Templars. For example, Brian de Bois Guilbert, the anti-hero antagonist of Ivanhoe, lusts after the Jewish heroine Rebecca, this girl right here, he's right there, and ends up dying for it. He ends up dying of a fit, rather like Philip IV of France. While some Hospitaller commanders were accused of keeping enslaved female concubines, the Templars were not. They didn't generally keep female slaves, or at least not ones that weren't already married to a male slave. And those were usually war captives. The Templars were usually accused of loving their horses too much, even within the rule itself. And the book, The Grand Master orders Rebecca burned at the stake as a witch. Not only was witchcraft not a likely accusation in 1191, even a charge of heresy for a Jewish woman was a few decades early, but the Templars showed no interest in prosecuting that charge. It's not a thing they would do. Further, while the rule was harsh on a brother who engaged in sexual relations with a woman, albeit it was not a cause for expulsion, it proposed no punishment or judgment of the woman whatsoever. The Grand Master's behavior seems more apropos for a Dominican or even a Teutonic Knight. The Teutonic Knights gained a reputation for claiming subject Christians in Eastern Europe had apostatized or were pagans so that they could reconquer them and exact tribute, hence the plot of the Soviet-era film Alexander Nevsky from 1938. There is little doubt that the main sources for modern images of the Templars are the Freemasons and their critics, most notably Sir Walter Scott, who's a very popular writer in Hollywood right now. This is how the anonymous, intentionally nondescript, and unassuming policemen of pilgrim routes in Outremer and the frontiers of the Iberian Peninsula and middle-aged farmers back in Europe became magicians and masters of esoteric lore stretching back to ancient Egypt. Hence, all of a sudden, they can curse a king and a pope. The image of a tall, muscular, bearded, pale-skinned warrior, let me find here, like this guy, in male and white knight's tabard, never the black or brown of the sergeants, however, is more recent and reflects a white supremacist obsession with the fantasy of a pure white medieval Europe and of a race war against people of color, like these guys. And yeah, these guys. Oh, and these guys. That can be attributed to the Ku Klux Klan and the proponents of the Southern Lost Cause and to the Nazi Party. The early Ku Klux Klan was a vigilante movement intended to turn back the progress of the Reconstruction period. The Klan of the early 20th century was a much more elaborate affair. These guys. While the idea of race war as a crusade already existed immediately after the Civil War, it was embroidered with pseudo-medieval and Masonic symbolism to attract a more mainstream audience in the 1910s and 1920s. So to capitalize on the medieval revival from the 19th century and early 20th century. The white robes of the Klan were intentionally evocative of certain Crusader groups, as were motifs like the cavalry charge pictured here of the Klan in the Lost Cause film, The Birth of a Nation from 1915. The Nazis were, if possible, even more obsessed by this idea, weaving into it distorted views of Celtic and quote-unquote Aryan heritage, as well as Wagnerian ideas about Grail Knights, though the early 20th century Templar movement in Palestine, T-E-M-P-L-E-R, is not actually related to any of this, let alone the medieval Templars. Wagner himself took a great deal of Aschenbach's Parzival for his own opera. To say that Wagner's attitude toward Kundry, the immortal Jewish woman who was cursed after mocking Christ and whose ultimate salvation is fatal, was ambivalent would be the understatement of the millennium. As with Scott's Rebecca, Kundry is one of the good guys by the time of the opera, but her status is strictly inferior to that of a Christian. This brings up a few possibilities for combating the use of the Templars as a model for race warriors today. The least useful, I think, is that of the book and movie The Da Vinci Code or the Assassin's Creed and Warcraft video games, which lean into the idea of the Templars as a sinister and morally ambiguous secret society and give credence to such conspiracy theories. Giving credence to conspiracy theories in the first place is likely a losing proposition. Far more effective have been attacks on the credibility of the Nazis to speak for neo-Templar groups, or the Klan for that matter. Steven Spielberg addresses this brilliantly and with considerable energy in the first and third films of the Indiana Jones series, not coincidentally considered the two best by many viewers. I'm sure everyone's got their favorites. Though this series is often dismissed as mere entertainment, and Spielberg and George Lucas originally intended it to be an homage to 1930s adventure serials, they are very early precursors, the movies are very early precursors to Spielberg's classic about the Holocaust, Schindler's List, and express the same outrage over the reappropriation by the Nazis of the Jewish culture they were otherwise obsessed with destroying in the 1930s. Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1981 and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade in 1989 have extremely strong mythological centers that are directly connected to the central character conflicts and moral dilemmas. An argument from the TV series The Big Bang Theory from the late aughts and early 2010s famously and irrelevantly argues that Indy is unimportant to the story because he has little influence on where the Ark of the Covenant ultimately ends up. This ignores the fact that the entire film is a test of all the main characters by the Ark itself to see which nation the Ark will choose to lead into battle in World War II. But the character conflict is Indy's struggle to redeem himself for seducing and abandoning Marion years earlier. Indeed, he starts out the film no better than morally than his nemesis, French archaeologist and fortune hunter Belloc. Thus, every time Indy chooses Marion's life and safety over the possession of the Ark, especially near the very end when the Ark is killing the Nazi expedition for daring to look inside it, ironically, he takes one step closer to proving himself worthy of possessing the Ark. Aside from moving the MacGuffin from the Old Testament to the New, the moral dilemma of the Last Crusade is essentially the same, but Indy's reaction is very, very different. Indy, of course, is an analog for Parsifal, Ilsa for Kundry, the Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword for the Templars, and so on. This version of the story, however, is an explicit challenge to the racism and anti-Semitism of the source material. So this Indy Templar is, for example, not at all anti-Jewish. As in the first film, the Nazis' virulent anti-Semitism renders them both too ignorant and too arrogant to be worthy of possessing either the Ark or the Grail. Indy's disinterest in the Grail itself, seeking only to find and rescue his father and his friend and boss, shows that he has grown considerably since Raiders of the Lost Ark. The Indy of Raiders, even in the end, would not have been worthy of the Grail. He's still obsessed with the Ark. The Indy of the Last Crusade, however, is willing to believe in the possibility that the Grail is real right off the bat, as he suggests near the beginning to his friend Marcus. But he is not willing to quest for the Grail until his father is put in danger. So he is disinterested on his quest. Because Indy seeks only to heal the relationship between him and his father, the suspiciously Templar-looking veteran of the First Crusade judges him worthy of replacing him at the end, who's guarding the Grail. Everyone gets what they seek in the story, but only Indy and his father, who repeatedly realizes his son is more important than his lifelong quest for the Grail, get it in a way that heals rather than destroys them. The message is a powerful one, and the films, of course, have been hugely powerful and influential in how people feel about the Holy Grail, for example, as a historical legend. One interesting component is that the Brotherhood of the Cruciform Sword, pictured here, are clearly Middle Eastern, and the Nazis look down upon them with contempt. Yet the brethren turn out to be brave and pure in their loyalty to their cause, even to the death. An early sign that Indy will be the successful Grail seeker comes when he rather reluctantly chooses to rescue a brother who is trying to kill him, Brother Kazim right here, and the brother, as a reward, then explains to him who and what he and his organization. And after Indy insists that he's only seeking his father and to rescue him, not the Grail, he couldn't care less, the Kazim effectively blesses his quest. The Mummy series from the late 1990s does something similar with the Pharaoh's Guard, the Magi, who remain loyal through hundreds of generations and reincarnations and are multiracial. This is in fact an accurate view of a way of viewing a Templar survival. The Templars were multicultural enough that they had so many local Christians in their ranks in Palestine that one of the most important permanent officers in the hierarchy, was the leader of those Christians, the Turcopolier. That's pretty multicultural. Simply telling truths that directly contradict anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the Templars also appears to be quite effective, albeit not with those wedded to such conspiracy theories. So these guys aren't going to be receptive, or these guys.
And Paula,
Jewish historians are often surprised and intrigued to find, for example, that the Templars and the Crown of Aragon in northeastern Spain usually had friendly relations with the Jewish communities there, to the point of standing up for them against other Christians and even the king. Again, this does not mean that every Templar was tolerant in this way, but the fact that a Crusader group of this type had this general ethos and over such a long period of time contradicts the automatic assumptions among those both for and against the idea of race war as a crusade that Latin Christians in the Crusader states were useful historical models of intolerance. In fact, it is doubtful that either the Templars or the Hospitallers would have survived such a tenuous situation for so long by being inflexible and intolerant. It would simply not an effective strategy in a situation where they are an embattled religious minority and or held incomplete military control over their territory. Therefore, those in modern times using this analogy are unlikely to have been in an actual situation of demographic minority or belonging to a powerful racial group despite their self-perception as victims. For example, these guys are just being obnoxious tourists overseas, showing that Templars used tolerance as a survival strategy and why is a direct challenge to this strategy of racism as victimhood. And for those of you curious about where the images came from, I've got a whole little bibliography right here. So we all set? You want me to stop sharing or just leave it up there?
Yeah, probably it will be better.
I can't hear
if you stop sharing.
Right, hang on.
Okay, is it better?
Oh, that's why I can't hear you. Hang on a second.
Yeah,
right,
okay.
Okay.
So I guess you can stop sharing the screen. And thank you so much for your fascinating talk. It was very interesting to see how, how the preparations of Templars evolved in the current discourses. And let us now move straight to the Q&A session. So we have like approximately 20-ish minutes to discuss these representations. First of all, let me remind you some rules. So all of you are muted now. And if you want to ask a question, do not hesitate to raise your hand digitally or drop a question to the chat. We will read it, or we will unmute you and allow you to ask your question directly. And as a chair of this session, maybe I will a bit abuse my possibility to squeeze in with my comment / question, which I will address to Igor and Jaime. So both of you actually told us many very interesting facts about actors in the social media, that is social media accounts, social media groups, YouTube channels, and so forth. And if we look at social media in general through the angle of social constructivism, we would perceive it as like an instrument which cannot function without the audience which interacts with it directly. So therefore, I would like to ask you, both more or less a twofold question. So first, how important is, in your opinion, the study of reception of disinformation in Igor's case, or for example, the arguments in case of Jaime, which were circulating in the accounts you were studying? And if you have attempted studying it, what initial results did your study bring? Thank you.
Well, let me, or if Jaime wants to answer first. It's more constructive. I have this, this information.
You gotta start because it's really complex.
Okay. Okay, so it is important to study this kind of things because we see the new generations coming even in the universities, even in the university I work on. I have contacts with students, and they are very much engaged with this kind of content, and they even ask me for some of these mentioned pages. Some of these mentioned pages that have this information, even though they are students of history, interested in medieval studies. So they inform themselves. Still, they inform themselves from the YouTube and Instagram pages, which means that we need to work on that thing. And I want to say that Res Historica is a great example of how these things should be done, actually. I have done the analysis only for the Serbian case for this paper, so I don't have any other analysis. I plan to work on these things more deeper and more detailed. This is just an overview, but I think it is very important to have courses at the universities and to engage the students themselves to make this kind of content.
Yeah, I haven't analyzed in detail all these questions, but in the case of the arguments and disputes, I think that social media are a place for where people tries to read the opinion that they already have. I didn't mention that, but I think that could be that could explain some behaviors, some toxicity on the internet, I think, at least partly. And yeah, totally, the interactions explain totally the existence of the social media. They are really important to them. I don't know what else to say. If you want that I develop something a little bit more, you can tell me.
Thank you so much. I think we are all set with your replies. So if you want to develop it in your further research, I'm looking forward to hearing your results on this. And well, we have two questions, and let's go in the order of the appearance of these questions. So the first question we've got is in the chat. So Irina, would you like to articulate it or should I read it from the chat? So if you want, we can unmute you, I guess.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
All right, so I was curious because of the fact that I also come from the Balkans, and we also have this complete mess of glorifying an imagined nationalistic past. I was curious about the relationship between the way history is being taught in school and this whole glorification on social media, because, well, in my own personal case, I can definitely say that the difference between the way history is being studied at the university and the history taught in schools and the attempts to popularize it on all kinds of media is actually quite big. So I was curious about the way history is taught in schools overall.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, but the difference is big in Serbia also. There is not, speaking for the medieval part, there is no such a gap between the school books because the Serbian historiography tends to be critical for these kinds of questions, and authors of the school books are often professors at the universities. So there is no big glorification of nationalistic past in the school books. I was working in the middle school for a few years, so I know this part. I'm not sure about the elementary school. Yeah, there is a difference between academic history and popular history and history taught at in the middle schools or elementary schools. The problem with, I think this is the problem in the Balkans, the general problem, is that the core of the identity of Balkan nations is often in medieval part of their history. There is a common sense of Ottoman conquest and so on. So the glorification of medieval past has more potential to be nationalistic. So it is even, there are some even forbidden topics so to speak, to investigate, such as it's not forbidden, but it is not very popular to investigate, for example, relations with the Roman Catholics, because in the ideal representation of Serbian past, you are completely Orthodox, and you don't have any connections to the Roman Catholics, but there were connections and there were contacts. This is in this part of Europe. So yeah, there is a difference, but it is not so obvious and it is not so big, speaking about the school books.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Irina, for this question, because it correlates very well to the very first session we had yesterday with a presentation made by Anna Dashinska, who actually demonstrated how medieval history is manipulated in school textbooks in Russia. So it's just fascinating to see how the scholarly approach and the educative approach is different from country to country to medieval history. And we have another question from James. So James, yeah, please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, I've got two questions, one for kind of Jamie and Igor and a second one for Paula, but maybe I will, but they're quite separate, so maybe I'll kind of do one at a time. So for Igor and Jamie, I guess my question to you guys is, and both of you had these thoughts on social media and engagement on it. And it's easy, I think, to see social media as this sort of giant open space with lots of people in it. But of course, because of some of these algorithm issues, actually, often people are in quite enclosed silos. And so I think for this question of how we can engage with it as historians, what I wanted to kind of prod you guys the thoughts on is, how can we avoid basically just creating our own little historian silo of, you know, a few hundred people maybe who will be quite engaged with our content, but that's actually a pretty small drop in the ocean, and it's likely to be the people who would be most likely to be kind of engaged with critical thinking about history to begin with. So sort of how do we avoid talking to like just a small and engaged but already leading our way group of people when it comes to kind of combating much wider disinformation?
Well, in the case of Serbian pages, I gave an example of the Instagram page Serbian Medieval History, which is very, very popular, but has a quite number of followers. So that could be an example that could be seen as a good example, because there is a wider reach of that page in Serbia. It is the page is called Serbian Medieval History or Srpska srednjovekovna istorija, and if you type the Serbian Medieval History or the Serbian title, this page pops within the first 2 or 3 results, both on Facebook or on Instagram. So you need to make a correlation between the visibility and to present it on a popular way, but keeping the critical text within that post. I'm not sure if I put it well, but
yeah, I agree with you. You need to adapt a bit that content to make it attractive for the general public. that is not always easy. You sometimes simplify it too much, but I think that's the sacrifice we need to make to get to more people. Because at the university, we already, the people are already interested on the works, but if we need to reach the rest of the society, we need to work a bit more on it and adapt ourselves a bit, I think.
Thank you. Is it okay if I ask my question to Paula as well?
Yes, so that's what
Yes.
I wanted to ask
Yeah.
you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, so my question to Paula, I mean, I think your talk was really interesting, and the extent to which the kind of complexities of some of these medieval groups, I guess, pulls them out of the mental frameworks that the modern far right use is interesting. I guess what I wanted to ask you in that your what you were doing was, I mean, rehabilitating would be far too strong a word, but like expressing a lot more of the complexities of how the Templars operated. Do you think that there's a risk here where that kind of thing can be quite good in some ways for blunting the sort of white supremacist discourses we have in, you know, Western Europe and North America, but at the same time, any movement towards, I guess, you know, humanizing or softening the view of a group like the Templars, even if that pull is there to pull it out of a white supremacist angle, might risk alienating people and popular discourses in other parts of the world, particularly and obviously the Middle East, where, you know, they have their own very strong discourses on things like the Crusades, and, you know, for all of that one can produce complexities about the Templars, there's still the baseline that they were an order founded for religious warfare. So I guess I was wondering whether you think that there is some sort of balance complexity in how kind of changing and reassessing our views would be seen in different parts of the world, and balancing those discussions.
Well, specific to the Middle East, that discourse derives directly from colonialism and Western views kind of imposed on the Middle East. It's not really an Ottoman era thing. Saladin and even the whole Crusades period was basically a footnote until about the 19th century. And you start having a rise in Arab identity as the Ottoman Empire really begins to fade and becomes the quote unquote old man of Europe. So a lot of this comes from Western thought anyway. And the whole idea of West versus East comes from the West anyway. So, I mean, that's a tricky one. I remember talking with someone, he was quite well educated. He had a master's degree in marine engineering, and he had been raised, and he'd done his public schooling and all of his history of Egypt and whatever under Nasser. And Nasser heavily promoted the idea of Saladin as this sort of native-born Arab hero who saved Egypt. And Saladin did a huge amount of damage to Arab culture in both Egypt and Syria, a ton. And he was a Kurd. And he was a conqueror, and he was not a very nice person at all. And there was just no way to budge this guy on it. And I, after a few stabs at it, I just gave up, said, yeah, okay. So I absolutely do think there's a balance. I mean, that one of the things probably didn't get enough time to get across here is that the original Templar mission basically had nothing to do with what people thought it was back in Europe. People were like, oh, they're fanatical crusaders. They're going to go charging in the Holy Land, things like that. The Templars were like, look, we're just trying to hold on here with our fingernails on this strip of land on the coast, you know, and we're just policing these pilgrim routes. And the Templars had a very practical function, and that is translated into modern times with, like, as I said, the UN. Local police forces are often very inspired by them. And the other thing is that we do have a very positive modern role model in the Freemasons, who have generally become quite welcoming of all sorts of religions and belief systems. And then you have Prince Hall Freemasonry, which is a direct contradiction. It's a direct challenge that has been around since the 18th century to this racist narrative. I mean, Prince Hall Freemasonry is African American, and it's very popular around here. There's nothing that Prince Hall Freemasonry is not faded at all. It's more popular than ever. So there's certainly, it's not whether we should be having this debate. This debate is happening. And there are people on both sides battling quite fiercely over the identity of the Templars, because the Templars are inspirational to this day, both for bad and good. So I just wanted to say, in terms of the fandom thing, in terms of the social media thing, and part of the problem with social media, is going back to the Usenet days, is that its biggest function at the time was basically for fandoms, for people who were fans of something and sort of like-minded to get together and talk about this like-minded stuff, and then fight vociferously over little tiny points of difference. But the problem is that it encourages people to wall themselves off into like-minded groups. And so when you're dealing with social media, I think you have to deal with the fact that it's designed that way. So how do you broaden out interest into a larger group? I think it's possible. I mean, quote unquote, nerd culture is now mainstream culture. So obviously it can be done. But I think you have to keep in mind that inherent, it started in chat rooms with people who are already on the same page. And so I think you have to deal with that, as you have to start these nuclei and then spread out. I'm not sure just starting off as a mainstream, hey, everybody, let's talk. People don't want to talk. People want to get together. They don't want to talk about different things. They don't want to hear different opinions necessarily. They want to get together and talk about the same opinion. So.
Many thanks. And I believe we still have some more minutes for another question to squeeze in. And we have raised hand from Juan Manuel.
Yeah, okay, so thank you again to all the panelists. These have been very interesting papers. We just have a few minutes, so I would ask a question, and this question is for Paula. Thank you for your paper. That was a really interesting exposition on the evolution and the image of the Templars. I would just maybe like to add something to what Paula was saying, and is that I agree with you when you say that most people who today, on the more far-right way in which they use the Templars, they would probably not recognize the historical Templars because they were more open and quote-unquote tolerant than we imagine it. I think it's a chronicle by Ibn Jubayr, who tells that when he was visiting Jerusalem, there was a Christian berating a Muslim for praying in the way in which the Muslims pray. And he tells that it was a couple of Templars who told the Christian, leave him alone, let him pray as he prays. So again, that's just a small example. But the question I want to ask you is that I was really intrigued by this idea, what you mentioned, that the race war as a crusade. And I want to maybe follow through that thread, because something that there is this study by a Brazilian scholar who wrote a piece on how the Templars were used in Brazil during the Bolsonaro campaign as figures not against Muslims, because that's not a problem in Brazil, but against multiculturalism or against progressive ideas. And that's I would like to maybe ask your opinion about this, that the crusading, that now the image of crusading and the image of the Templars is not only against Muslims, as it may have been very strongly in the aftermath of 9/11, but it has become something bigger. Trump, there is as a Templar, is not only because Trump is against Muslims, it's because Trump seemed to represent something against anything that we might characterize as progressive politics, call it the fight against climate change, call it social equality, call it sexual liberation, etc. So I wanted to maybe know your opinion on this expansion of crusading, not against what we would call quote unquote traditional enemies of crusader-like types like Muslims or Jews and anti-Semitism, but into something that it kind of seems to transcend that traditional usage of crusading and Templar imagery.
Well, of course, the story of Ibn Munkid is really talking about the contrast between Christians who have been in the Holy Land for a while and understand the realpolitik of it, and Christians who are newly come to the Holy Land, who came specifically on crusade and are very fanatical. It's just like a natural, and it takes them a while to get used to things. And the Templars were charged in the Mount, and apparently they did allow, even though Jews were technically not allowed in the city, they apparently did allow Jews to visit the Temple Mount and worship there, Maimonides, for example. In terms of race war, I think it probably started as the religious war between Catholics and Protestants that's brought up by Fuller and then Gibbon. But the race war thing is really, I think, a Ku Klux Klan thing. And the Ku Klux Klan, it's really complex when we're not entirely sure what was going on, but we think the Klan intentionally appropriated Masonic tropes to grab some of the Freemasonry's popularity, especially in the early 20th century. And to do so, they tried to grab some of the Crusader mythology and the Templar mythology specifically, because the Templar uniform, of course, is what the original First Crusade uniform was. It wasn't, even though they were awarded it in the 1140s, it wasn't exclusive to the Templars. But the Templars get associated with that. And the Klan really, really promoted this idea of race war against Black people, against Jews, against immigrants. They were a nativist, what we call a nativist movement. They were very isolationist. And we have the Klan today. I can guarantee you we have Klan in this very county. And they're much weaker than they used to be. But I mean, we have a guy who parades around the Walmart in his pickup with a big old Confederate flag sticking out the back. We have people who go down with license plates that have a Confederate flag or have like the black bars that's supposedly pro-police. We have a lot of white supremacy openly displayed around here. I am in white supremacy central, and that's because half of our county is African-American. So I think you can really blame that one on the Klan. You know, and you can say, well, the Klan was 19th century. No, sadly, the Klan is today. The Klan is today. And they have the Klan and then the Nazis, and then you have neo-Nazis who are some weird mix of the Klan and and Nazis and whatever. And it's a white supremacy thing that has been going on at least since the 19th century. And that's where all the anti-Catholic and nativist and racism and things like that, and goes down to Brazil. It's sad that it's down in Brazil, but I mean, you have narco-terrorism with groups that claim to be in Mexico who claim to be Templars. And I'm like, where did that come from? I don't know, you know. Yeah. So did that answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for this fruitful discussion, and I believe we are slowly moving to the end of this session. So it's been a pleasure to listen to all of these representations we had and to chair this session. And now I'll pass the word to Juan Manuel, who is going to make a small administrative remark.
Yeah, so again, well, first of all, Olga, thank you for agreeing to chair this session. And again, thank you for our panelists. We will have our last panel in roughly half an hour. Its title is Teaching the Middle Ages, Strategies and Approaches. I've seen that some of our future panelists of the next panel have already logged in, but I need to close the session in order to convert the recording. So we will reopen the session like in 20 minutes time. Again, you can use the same link and we'll see you there. Thank you very much.